Hi.
Hello.
How's everybody doing?
Good. How are you?
Lisa, good.
Pretty good.
Lisa, did you get my updated PowerPoint that said March 4th on it?
Let me see. So you can also share from your own screen.
Well, I'm not going to trust myself because I have this new computer
Right.
and I'm still getting used to it. It's like a little high tech for me.
Did you send it just now?
I sent it about 20 minutes ago, maybe. And it has a date of March 4th on it. Do you see it?
I don't. I was just in another panel until like 5 minutes ago. So I wasn't super on my email, but I'm looking
I
at it.
noticed that some of the slides were not in the right order. So I had to change the order around a little bit.
I don't see it. Would you mind just sending it one more time?
I'd be glad to do that. Yeah, I sent it at 11:29, but I'm gonna.
Also, it looks like you accidentally got named as Eli as well. Do you know how to rename yourself on Zoom?
I can do it.
Oh yeah, as the host.
Do it.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to have a doppelganger to achieve more, and now I have my opportunity, and it would be Mary Lou, which would be awesome. Everything is coming together as I wished.
Except we'll have to make it Eli Lou.
I like that. I like that very much.
Michelle, I'm gonna text you Mary Lou's full name so that to make sure you get the spelling.
Okay, Lisa, I sent it to you again.
Perfect, thank you.
So I
So
just want to say I'm really sad that we can't be there in person, because I used to go to that conference years ago and it was like the best conference in the whole world.
we're really hoping that next year it will be in person. It's kind of hard because you have to reserve all the rooms like way ahead of time. Okay, I just got the new PowerPoint. So
Cool.
it's hard to know like what the pandemic is going to be like.
We're done with it. Let's all be optimistic. We're done. We're finished.
I super get that. So Eli and Neil, do you guys both want to share your own PowerPoints?
Yeah, if that works.
Yeah,
Hopefully that'll work.
it should work. We just did it in the last panel I was in and it was totally good to go.
Lisa, what's our order?
So it's okay to change it, but right now I have it Mary Lou, Neil, and then Eli. Is that okay with everybody?
That's totally
Hopefully.
fine. Yeah.
We'll find out afterwards.
Yeah. The PowerPoint is still downloading, but it should be ready in a second. If you guys want to double check your share screen, you can. It's just the big green button in the center. Oh, here we go.
I made it so all panelists should have ability to share, so you all should be good to go.
Yeah, I can try it, but it looks like it should be fine.
Yeah, I think it should be.
It allows me to click the button.
Perfect.
I'm trying to share mine right now just to see. And it says I'm in a practice session and that I am screen sharing and y'all can see.
Yep.
Does that work?
Yeah, the practice session just means that attendees can't get in. attendees are finally in, we'll give it a minute for everyone to get in, and then we'll just get started with the introductions.
Lisa, do you want us all on the screen visible while the other is talking, or how do you want to handle?
That's up to you. If you'd like to be on screen, that's good. If you want to turn on screen and drink your coffee or something too.
Well, I guess since the PowerPoint's going to be up and that's going to be the main thing that people are seeing, it doesn't really matter because we'll all be off to the side anyway. So
Yeah.
I'm going to turn mine off when other people are talking.
If you want to turn it off turn it on at the Q&A at the end, though, that would be good. All right, it looks like we've got a pretty full list of participants. I'm going to start with the introduction. So hi, everybody. Welcome to the Public Interest Environmental Law Conference, and thank you for coming to the Successful Tactics in River Restoration panel. I am a conference, my name is Lisa Milstein. I'm a conference co-director for POC this year, and I'm going to be moderating this panel. Just a few quick announcements before we start. So if you're an attendee, don't worry if you can't see or hear yourself. All attendees in webinars are automatically muted and video off. But throughout the panel, if you have questions, please feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom panel, and we will get to answering all the questions that we can at the end. We should have about 15 minutes towards the end for Q&A. Additionally, if there are any legal professionals wanting to earn CLE for this panel, I'll be dropping a drop form in the chat, and you may register for that. And next to that, I will be adding a form from Friends of Land or Water that helps provide stipends for law students doing unpaid public interest environmental law internships over the summer. If you're interested in making a donation to Friends of Land or Water to help provide those students with stipends, the information will also be put in the chat right after this. And lastly, I want to do a land acknowledgement. So the University of Oregon is located on Kalapuya Elehi traditional indigenous homelands. So this is the homeland of the Kalapuya people. Following the treaties between 1851 and 1855, Kalapuya people were dispossessed of their indigenous homeland by the United States government and forcibly removed from the coast reservation to the coast reservation in Western Oregon. Today, descendants are citizens of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and also the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians of Oregon, and continue to make important contributions in their communities at the University of Oregon and across the land we now refer to as the state of Oregon. PILC would like to acknowledge the traditional homelands of the Kalapuya peoples in the Willamette Valley and express our respect for the tribal nations of all of Oregon. Now I will introduce our panelists for today. So first we have Mary Lee Soscia. She is the Columbia River Coordinator for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency Region 10 and leads the Clean Water Act Section 123 of the Columbia River Basin Restoration Program to reduce toxics in the Columbia River Basin with a special focus on tribal communities as high fish consumers. Mary Lou also provided leadership on the Columbia River temperature, total maximum daily load, the proposed federal promulgation of tribal baseline water quality standards, and has represented EPA in Columbia River treaty work efforts. Mary Lou has over 40 years of experience with the state, federal, and tribal government in watershed and river management issues and has a bachelor's and master's in geography. Next, we will have Neil Goeller, who is a practicing hydrologist and geomorphologist in British Columbia for about 15 years with a broad range of experience in consulting, government, research, and regulatory work. He has worked on projects across the Western Canada, as well as Europe and South America. He oversees a group that manages the BC Hydrometric Networks, develops operational standards, and provides training and resources for capacity building across the province. And then finally, we will have Elizabeth or Eli Holmes, who serves as a Willamette Riverkeeper staff attorney. Willamette Riverkeeper is the eyes and ears of the 107-mile-long Willamette River and thousands of miles of streams, tributaries, wetlands, and forest waters that breathe life into the entire basin. Willamette Riverkeeper's work starts in the Cascades and Coast Range Mountains and winds through forest lands, agricultural lands, industrial sites, and Oregon's largest cities. Willamette Riverkeeper staff attorney works on a diverse water, air, land use issues at the local, state, and federal levels. And Eli brings 20 years of civil litigation experience to this role, advocating for communities and critters throughout the basin. And she's also the Carrie Ryberg Award winner for POC this year for the Grassroots Public Interest Environmental Lawyers. So without further ado, we will start with Mary Lou's presentation.
Well, Lisa's going to start my presentation for me. While she starts it, I'll just open up. Hi, everybody. I'm Mary Lou Soscia. I'm with EPA Region 10, as Lisa said. I've been working on rivers and watersheds for a really long time. I'm really honored to speak to everybody today. It's a shame we can't be there in person. When I first moved to Oregon in the early 90s, I attended, one of the first things I did right after I moved to Oregon was attended the Public Interest Law Conference at the University of Oregon. And I just was amazed. It's an amazing conference, amazing energy, and amazing people. And I'm really honored to speak to you today about my work efforts. And I'm waiting on, and Lisa, I just got a new computer. So Lisa's, I don't trust myself. So Lisa's gonna be doing the present. She's gonna be running the presentation. So I think we're almost there. So as Lisa said, I'm gonna be talking about the Columbia River Basin Restoration Program. And so next slide, Lisa. So as most folks may know, Eugene is based in the Columbia River Basin. It's a really important part of the Columbia River Basin. And Lisa also talked in her land acknowledgement about two really important tribes, the Siletz tribe and the Grand Ronde tribe, that are part of the Columbia River Basin tribes. The Columbia River Basin is one of North America's largest watersheds. It's actually about the size of France, 260,000 square miles. It has its headwaters in British Columbia, where another one of our esteemed panelists is from. And it includes 7 states, including significant portions of Idaho, Oregon, Washington, and Western Montana. And it's an ecosystem that provides tremendous environmental, economic, cultural, and social benefits to millions of people, and also lots of fish, really important fish and wildlife. Next slide, Lisa, please. So I'm going to be talking today about PA work effort that we actually consider successful. And the reason why it's successful, I'll talk more about it, but we're going to be talking about how we're working to reduce toxics in the basin. And as Lisa said, we're really focused on, we started being focused on tribal fish consumers, but let me just give you just a sense of why toxics are really important. So this little graphic just shows like just the multiple sources of toxics that can enter the basin. We've got point sources, industries through treatment plants. We've got non-point sources through agriculture, urban stormwater, consumer products, the choices we make, and the clothes we wear, and the things we do. There's agriculture runoff, and there's also hazardous waste sites. There's a whole plethora of sources of toxics going into the basin. And there's scientific research that shows that toxics are present throughout the entire Columbia Basin. And there's also scientific research that shows that toxics harm fish, wildlife, and human health. Next slide, Lisa. So as also in the introduction, what is really important is that this work is sort of foundational, and it's based on tribal people. And we had done a lot of work to understand tribal fish consumption and also contaminants in fish. And this work is sort of based on what we see as our government to government responsibility and our trust responsibility to tribal people and tribal governments in the Columbia Basin to reduce toxics in fish and to protect tribal human health. Next slide. And that photograph was from Celilo Falls, and some may know that Celilo Falls was a really important fishing site for thousands of years in the Columbia River that was inundated by the Dalles Dam in 1956. So Columbia River Basin tribal people have lived in the basin for more than 10,000 years. We know from our fish consumption work efforts that they eat far more fish. We also know that the toxics that they eat are toxics that cause cancer, DDT, PCBs, and other mercury and other toxics that have really serious human health effects. And they pose unacceptable risks to tribal people as high fish consumers and to other high fish consuming populations. So what we did is we said, we want to create a program. We want to create a collaboration in the basin that brings people together to work collaboratively to reduce toxics in the basin and to reduce exposure of high fish consuming people and other folks, as well as protecting fish and wildlife. Next slide, please. So what we started to do is try to collect information. In 2009, we did a State of the River report where we tried to tell the toxic story. We looked at 4 different contaminants: DDT, PCBs, mercury, and then PBDEs, which polybromated diphenyl ethers, which are flame retardant that were sort of like innocuous everywhere in the basin. And we told the story about those contaminants and what had been done successfully to reduce them, and also what was still needed to be done. And then in 2010, we followed that up with an action plan where we said, here are the 61 actions that need to be done. And we oriented those actions in 2 frameworks. We said, here's what we can do now with the resources we have now, which is not very much. And here's what we can do if we get more resources. And then as a result of that work effort, we saw legislation being introduced in Congress in both 2010 and 2014. It was focused on toxics, focused on the Columbia River Basin. And at that time, EPA was doing an ongoing regulatory parallel work effort where we were working with the state of Oregon to develop water quality standards that actually provided a fish consumption rate that was protective of high fish consumers. That regulatory effort was adopted in 2011, and that was at that time the most stringent state criteria for fish consumption in the nation. And then we also worked with the state of Idaho. We did a fish consumption survey with the Idaho tribes. The state of Idaho did adopt, they did adopt criteria in 2017. They weren't as high as EPA would have liked to have seen. And then there's a work effort right now underway in Washington where there's actually going to be, there's a proposal to actually change Washington criteria that were also adopted like 2017, 2018. And we're proposing to change those criteria and make them more protective. And it's all based on tribal fish consumption rate and tribal treaty rights. So that was a parallel regulatory effort in those 3 states. Next slide, Lisa, please. So what is really exciting and a really amazing success that actually in 2016, Congress passed the Columbia River Basin Restoration Act, which was amendment to Section 123. And that actually did 2 things. It established a grant program that EPA would administer that would provide grants throughout the basin to lots of different entities to reduce toxics in a whole bunch of a series of actions. And then it codified this collaboration that we had created around the basin. We created a Columbia River Toxics Reduction Working Group, and we created that group in 2004, 2005, and the legislation codified that collaboration, and it directed EPA to move forward and manage that collaboration. And so we started moving forward on those work efforts. Next slide, please. So in order to do that, we actually, and I'm gonna have to see if I can move the, I'm gonna move this so I can see the slide. So we developed a mission statement. The EPA Columbia River Basin Restoration Program, through the implementation of Clean Water Act Section 123, will be a catalyst for basin-wide toxics reduction work efforts, enabling communities to access unimpaired watersheds with healthy fish and wildlife and quantifiable toxics reductions in fish, wildlife, and water. That is our mission our vision statement, and that is the program that we are building through this legislation and through our past work. Next slide, please. So we have this, we have a working group, the collaboration, and it includes tribal government, state government, NGOs, private citizens, anybody who wants to participate. And then we share information, and we're now sharing information on the implementation of Clean Water Act Section 123. We're sharing information on how we, what are the toxics around the basin. And we meet every 6 months. We have meetings twice a year. Our next meeting is May 11th of this year, and anybody is welcome to participate. We used to meet in person, now we meet remotely. We hope we'll meet in person again sometime in the future, maybe in the fall of this year. But this is a broad collaboration, and we welcome folks to participate in it. Next slide, please. So we know it works to reduce toxics. We've done a lot of work showing things that have happened, like in the Yakima Basin. DDT was, they met 20-year goals in 5 years to reduce DDT and lift the fish advisory. We've seen really important cleanups occur. We've seen green infrastructure reduce toxics by 90% in certain runoff. And so we're trying to take these successful efforts and replicate them throughout the basin. We're trying to provide leadership and collaboration. Our working group is a platform for everybody to work together and share information. And then we're bringing science in. We're bringing our own science at EPA, and anybody as a part of our collaboration who can bring science in to help us move forward, based upon good science. Next slide, please. So we did in September 2020. We launched a grant program, and we, with 2 years of funding of congressional appropriations, a very modest amount, $2 million, we awarded 14 grants in September 2020. 7 are focused on monitoring. They're spread throughout the basin, and 7 are focused on reducing toxics, which include agricultural best practices, stormwater green infrastructure, pollution prevention, community engagement and education. Abroad, like some developing bilingual materials in the gorge, developing green infrastructure in the upper part of the Willamette Basin, doing some contaminants of emerging concern monitoring in the lower Columbia, trying to understand mercury in Flathead Lake, working with the Salish Kootenai tribe, a broad range of projects. Next slide, please. And we're seeing accomplishments with increased green infrastructure. We're seeing waterfish and invertebrate samples being analyzed in our monitoring programs. New agricultural partnerships are coming on board in the pesticide stewardship partnerships, which are partnerships between government and farmers, and that work had been happening in Washington and Oregon, and now we've got partners in Idaho. We've got farms in Idaho that are coming on board on that. And we're seeing, as I mentioned, the development of bilingual educational materials. Next slide. So right now we're about Tuesday, March 8th, we're closing a second grant application process. We're hoping to award about 30 grants throughout the basin. We had 2 RFAs, one for the estuary portion of the basin and one for the portion of the basin above the estuary and the US parts of the watershed. Our priorities are the same priorities we had in the first grant round: increasing monitoring, reducing stormwater, and reducing toxics through green infrastructure and agriculture best practices, promoting citizen engagement and involvement through pollution prevention activities. And then Western Montana has a lot of these small scale mining cleanups, and so we allowed the opportunity to pursue non-circular related mining cleanups as a part of our grant program. Next slide. Now, the most exciting thing that happened for our program just happened on November 15th when the president signed the bipartisan infrastructure law. And in that, our last congressional appropriation in FY21 had been $1.5 million, and we received $79 million of funding in that program. And that funding is it's going to go over a 5-year period. And what we're going to be doing is we're just going to be ramping up. We're just going to be doing, we're like those 14 grants that I just talked about. We're going to be figuring out how we just get multiple grants all throughout the whole basin to reduce toxics. And in those same areas that I talked about, We're trying to figure out how we can get, we're looking at in the fall, maybe having a focused request for applications on monitoring grants. We're looking on how we can figure out ways to support we have 16 tribal governments in the basin that we work with, and how do we support those tribal governments? How do we have, how do we figure out competitions that seem fair, you know, in terms of help, doing our trust responsibility to tribal governments. So, and we'll be hiring new staff. We're going to really focus on accountability. We're going to focus on leadership. We're focusing on community engagement and collaboration. Next slide, please. So, you know, I think this slide just repeats what I just said. We're just going to be, you know, figuring out how we move forward. And then I think the next slide I want to talk about, I want to highlight what I think our successes are. And that's the next slide, Lisa. So I think what are the successes of this program? We're on a panel on successful. I think one of the big successes is that we're focused on human health protection for tribal people. And I consider that as like the cornerstone of our work effort. You know, the tribal people have been here for thousands of years, and we have a responsibility. We have a really important responsibility to protect their human health and restore healthy fish populations. I think our second success is the collaboration. We built a collaboration across the basin that goes from, you know, it goes from Astoria all the way up to Flathead Lake. I mean, we have a lot of people around the basin that are working together to help restore this basin. We got an amendment to the Clean Water Act. That's gigantic. The Columbia River Basin is named in the Clean Water Act. Puget Sound has been getting money for years, but Puget Sound is not named in the Clean Water Act. And I don't want to disparage Puget Sound, but I want to emphasize the importance of that amendment to the Clean Water Act. And we've been seeing our annual congressional appropriations increase over time. And now we've got the bipartisan infrastructure law. And my talking point on that is that we're going to see, by this funding and by this work, we're going to see less cancer in the basin. We're going to see better childhood health protection. And we're going to see a decrease, over time, a decrease exposure to toxic contaminants. So those are my what I believe are the successes of this program. Next slide, please. And so we're moving on to the future. Children are our future. This is for the children of the basin and the people of the basin. We have a story map on our EPA website. We have lots of information. We've done a whole bunch of technical documents. Come join our collaboration. Come be a part of our work. We welcome anybody's participation, and thank you for a chance to share this story to everybody today. It's really been an honor to talk to you about this work effort. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was awesome.
Okay, should I share my screen now?
Yes.
If we were in person, I'm sure there would be a lot of applause. Yes. Okay, I think move that out of the way. Ooh, went to this side for some reason. Can you see that? Am I sharing the right thing here?
I think you need to click the present button.
Oh. What do you see? I can't see what.
We can see the PowerPoint, but it's not in the present form.
Okay, hold on one second here. Let's try this again. How about now? Did that work? Okay, seems like it worked. Okay, I'll get going. So yes, coming to you from Canada this time. So I'll talk a bit about our project here. It was on the San Juan River restoration project, also a research project. We were researching the effectiveness of the restoration project. That's still ongoing. San Juan River is also known as the Pacheedaht River, which is the name shared by the First Nation whose lands are at the estuary and encompass the basin. I would also recognize that I'm coming to you from the lands of the Snuneymuxw First Nation on Vancouver Island. And my conspirators in this, Tom Millard and Ryan McQueen. How do I advance here? I'd like to start with restoration. I see as everybody should be quiet near a little stream and listen. wisdom from old children's books by Ruth Krauss and Murray Sendak. I think if we all were a little quieter and listened to nature, it's relevant to how the research project that we did in this case is really based on what's called process-based restoration, and I'll get to that a little later. Just a quick outline, I'll talk a little bit about the site here, depending on how well you know Canada, or at least British Columbia, some history of where we got to our problem, the regulatory framework that we have here in Canada and its protections that it provides, and then talk a bit about our restoration program and hopefully some conclusions. You can get a sense of the size of the river. This is our research team out there looking for rocks, which is more exciting to me than it may be to you. But you can see the river's quite wide, 40 to 50 meters wide. It's got a big meander reach with about 100 to 150 meters of gravel, and then outside that, the floodplain. And if you can see where I point, there's tire tracks all through here. This is recreational vehicles on the river that drive across at the riffles, which are the shallowest parts, which is also where the salmon spawn. So causes a great deal of problems, but not necessarily our big problem we're dealing with. San Juan River is here. It's in the south end of Vancouver Island, just across the border. It empties out into the mouth of this Juan de Fuca Strait, southwest corner of Canada. Here we are. This is what the river looks like. So it's a wandering gravel bed river. It's got gravel bars on the side. On the right side of the picture here is an alder forest. That's the south side of the river. The left side of the image shows you a conifer forest. These forests develop as a result of successional vegetation that establishes post-harvest. So there's a lot of forest activity. And this basin primarily is the result of the damage as a result of historic forest practices. So a little bit of the watershed history here. We had active logging started in around the late 1800s, continuing to present day. Historical forest practices generally were harvesting the riverbanks first to put the logs into the river and float them down, because that was the easiest way to get them out. And then we moved further up the hill slopes. The result of historic practices, because they were based on the science of the day and the regulatory regime, was a lot of sediment delivery into the channels. And that is incredibly detrimental to fish habitat. And so concerns from the First Nation community around their traditional fishing areas that were disappearing or moving or silting in, or the eggs weren't surviving, and so on. So I would say that although things were done poorly, things have improved greatly. We'll talk about that in a moment. So to talk about the importance of the riparian area, I showed you that photo before that showed the edges of the river. For context, in case you don't know, the riparian corridor is the vegetation along the banks of the river. It serves a really important purpose in terms of holding the banks together, providing shading to regulate stream temperature, providing habitat, also providing food for the fish, and so on. So an incredibly important area. It was the first area to get logged usually when we had initial logging, because like I said, it's easy to put the trees into the stream. And I would say, contrary to Mary Lou's presentation, we're far away from industrial and commercial development here. We're an entirely forestry-based watershed in terms of land use. So we have that advantage of no chemical pollution. Instead, we have sort of naturally derived problems. So hopefully you can see this animation. I don't know how well it transfers over the internet, but it's about 6 years from Sentinel-2 imagery and shows you how rapidly the river is migrating. The floodplain, as I kind of showed roughly with the brackets on the left there, the river should be migrating back and forth across the floodplain and kind of distributing itself in a narrower channel, well vegetated, multiple channels that are much more suitable to fish habitat. But as a result of the damage to the riparian corridor and the oversupply of sediment, we have this very narrow meander, no longer really functional. Try to load you up with a lot of information here. What happens is the gravel bars are built. They start off as bare gravel, willow plants establish on the bar, and then alder succeeded into the back. And if we had a good system here, it would succeed into cottonwood and eventually into conifer and would be nice and stable. These arrows are supposed to indicate the river is now cutting into this bar. And these bars generally live for about 20 to 30 years, which is just about enough for the alder to establish. This is what it looks like from river level. So here's the alder on the bank. There's a few conifers here, but these are 3 to 5 meters tall. The river frequently floods over banks, so it'll go up by up to 5-6 meters depending on when it floods. These rain-dominated systems are very flashy, and it just tears the bank away. And these trees don't provide any protection or stability. So I just want to talk a little bit about what kind of ecosystem protection we have in BC. So given the forestry impacts of the riparian area, the instability of the river, the damaged fish habitat, how did we get to this point? Well, you know, this fellow who was trying to cross the river in his truck, like those tire tracks I showed you earlier, we actually watched him get stuck, and he managed to hitchhike his way out of here. But because we happened to be there, we took some pictures, and he got a visit from the police and from the federal fisheries officers. Looking back at the forestry in BC, at least, regulation-wise, in and around the mid-1800s was when they first established regulation. And basically, it was just to retain the economic value in BC. You can cut trees so long as you don't, so long as we process them here, so long as we make money on them. In the 47, we saw the entry to a forest management area. We actually started managing the forest somewhat as a resource, not until the late 70s when we established the Ministry of Forests and the Chief Forester, and we had integrated resource planning. So there's actually planning forest as a resource, looking a little further forward in terms of how do we make it sustainable, stop cutting so many trees. There, it was up until that point, you could pretty much cut as many trees as you want. 95 was when we really got into regulation. We had the Forest Practices Code Act. It was a more socialist government. We had these things called the guidebooks. I think it's about 4 or 5 feet tall of books that are very prescriptive on forest activities. And through that period up until 2004, we saw increasing protection of forests. There was strong regulatory authority from the province, and there was there was very prescriptive practices that helped improve the quality of operations in the forest. In 2004, following a change in government, we entered an area of deregulation and deprofessionalization with the Forest and Range Practices Act. And so from this era, we basically moved to what's called professional reliance. The province sets objectives, and the forest companies can decide how they meet those objectives by hiring their own professionals, and those professionals decide what they can do and how well they can meet the metrics. In all these cases, I mean, we still had companies that saw the value in being good stewards, and they did great work, and we had the companies that did not care. So, but from 2004 on, we really have an era where industry's in the driver's seat, and they can essentially do what they want if they want to. We now have Bill 23, which is an amendment to FERPA. Try not to use too many acronyms since we're in a different country, but what's proposed, hasn't passed yet, is forest landscape plans, which will be 10-year integrated management plans to manage the ecological values with the economic value, and they will involve more stakeholder engagement, and a big part of that is First Nations involvement in the decision making. So you can kind of see we've kind of fluctuated in terms of the regulation and the protection, but this is all kind of eroded by this statement, which appears throughout the regulations and the acts. These are our administrative acts that come with some powers through the province. And the gist of this section here, I just clipped it out. It basically says, you can protect the ecosystems so long as you're not unduly reducing the supply of timber. And you can, I'm a skeptic by nature, but what this does is it kind of gives a bit of a free ride to say that we'd like you to protect nature, but if you can't because you still need to make money, then that's okay. In reality, it's not quite that soft. The Act does provide a lot of protections and authority if we can use it appropriately. There's other regulations as well. We've got some provincial acts, the Land Act, the Water Sustainability Act, the Riparian, there's a Federal Fisheries Act, but all of these are based on asking permission. So people can apply to do work, and we can regulate the work by what they ask for. If they go out and just do something, we have to actually find it. We have to find staff time to pursue it. We have to hire lawyers from the justice branch. And there has to be a willingness of the province to pursue action and penalties. And often a first offense means nothing. We also have designations for protection, like fishery sensitive watersheds and community watersheds. So those are supposed to designate watersheds we recognize as important. But again, it's incumbent on the applicants, the landowners, to do what they think is right to protect the resource. And then enforcement's always an issue. To dedicate staff, to dedicate licensed professionals who can support the enforcement is very challenging. As you can see here, there's one person out there watching the landscape. In the San Juan, it's really just the forest companies who are out there. There's very little, there's no residential out there. There's nobody driving by this every day to complain. I'll give a little timeline for restoration in terms of the work here. 95, when we're talking about the guidebooks coming in. That's when Forest Renewal BC came in. Again, somewhat more socialist government. So we had more taxes on the logging companies to fund restoration. The San Juan Steering Committee was started. So again, this is the San Juan River. It had a steering committee as an official signed agreement between provincial ministries and the logging companies. And they put about $1 million through that FRBC into the basin. The logging companies and industry put probably another 5-6 million in of their own. That only lasted to 2001, change in government, FRBC is canceled, they go back to deregulation. There's no more funding for restoration, the industry's in the driver's seat. But interestingly, the Stewardship Roundtable persists, and this is still the group that was formed in 96, but persists on goodwill. Industry's still at the table, First Nations are there, federal fisheries, provincial involvement. And so more recently, our restoration program, which was coordinated by the Roundtable, and that was their objective initially, was the steering committee was to coordinate restoration. We got federal funding through Recreational Fisheries Conservation Partnership Program, the Coastal Restoration Fund. Cash inflow was totaling about 2 million, but both of those are in-kind contributions. So from the industry contribution and staff time and so on, we're up to another 2-3 million over that. So a lot of money coming into the basin. It's not nearly as much as the economic value that's been extracted, but it was something. So just to talk a bit about our restoration, the theory we used was this process-based restoration. So going back to listening to the stream, we look at what was happening naturally, and we're trying to accelerate it a little bit to get ourselves ahead of the stream. The stream is reworking its materials too quickly. How can we slow it down? So we work on this society growing great when we plant trees whose shade we will never sit in. And you'll see why that's the case here in a moment. Part of our research program, we were looking at the rate of change in the river. Just looking at the blue arrow, it's about 150 meters of bank retreat. That's about 6,000 cubic meters a year of sediment being put into the river, which is about a quarter of the peak sediment delivery to the river. Like, it's a staggering amount of sediment for a river to be accommodating. And the river's only getting wider. It's making the temperature problem worse. It's making the river shallower. It's causing temperature and habitat issues. So a few of the things we did, this is mostly the industry side. The forest companies rehabilitated a lot of landslides. They put roads to bed. They pulled river crossings. They removed a lot of the sediment sources from the upslope. And they've done a huge amount of work that has reduced the amount of incoming sediment pretty close to the background pre-impact levels, which is amazing. It's been a huge success, and it's all on the goodwill of the forest companies to address sites that were identified as high risk. We also planted, try to get my numbers right, I think around 120,000 willow, cottonwood, and mostly willow and cottonwood stakes and conifers. So this is a bar stabilization program. Show you what this looks like. You harvest stock from existing plantations using an excavator. You pull back the sediment and stick the stakes in, and willows will grow pretty much anywhere so long as they don't dry out. This was basically mostly First Nations crews that did it based on, I think for this stuff, I wrote the prescriptions, funded by the feds, and work carried out under the direction of the Apache Dad. This is what it looks like. You basically turn a gravel bar into what looks like a medieval fortification. So they're all pointed downstream so that they don't get eroded out. They can be buried by sediment. They can be ground up by cobbles. In some cases, they can even be driven over. And so long as they don't dry out, they will root, they will grow, and they will flourish. We had incredible success with this. I think we had 95 to 99% survival, and we had about 80 to 85% lasting through the years that hasn't been eroded away. This just shows what they look like. This is by the following, planted in the spring, by the fall, they're rooted and and by the next spring, they're basically leafing out. The other thing we did, which is part I was talking about, is planting trees for the future. And like Mary Lou was saying, important to look after the next generation. We planted riparian planting. So we interplanted the riparian areas with cottonwood and Sitka spruce. The intention being that in 60 to 100 years, these trees, the river will be coming up against these trees. They will have sunk roots deep enough that they will begin to hold the bank together. When they do fall in the river, they'll be big enough to begin to create some bank protection. So we won't be around to see it happen, but that's the theory at least. I'll talk real quick because I think I don't want to take up too much time here. So Coastal Restoration Fund money the last couple of years was hampered a little bit by COVID, but they have got some work in. We could play spot the difference, but I'll show you what it is. Essentially, it was creating low elevation salt marsh habitat here, some flow through channels, some improved circulation, more low salt marsh habitat, and there was a culvert here and it's changed to a bridge, basically creating more rearing habitat for salmonids. And it was recognized that the natural populations didn't have enough rearing habitat. They're out migrating too small. They're not surviving in the ocean. And so there's fewer and fewer returns. And already these projects, they've seen a great increase in the usage of rearing fish in these areas. And this project's ongoing, but already in the first year, quite a lot of success in it. Just offering a few final thoughts, I would say that the roundtable has been incredibly effective. I've been a part of a number of roundtables on the island, and one of the things I've seen is the first thing people do is they get together with all the stakeholders in the basin and find somebody to blame. And then when they find someone to blame, they try to make them pay for the restoration. In the San Juan, maybe that ship had sailed by the time I joined, but basically all the people at the table, whether they were to blame or not, worked together to move forward from where we were. We looked at what the state of the basin was, and we looked at how we could get the best benefit out of restoration. The forest companies brought money, they bought trees for the planting, they loaned expertise for the prescriptions and so on. And the problems that we had from the legacy impacts are a result of poor regulation, of a poor understanding of the science, a lack of caring at the time for the environment and so on. That's just a sign of the times. The people who did it, the people responsible, the companies responsible are long gone. And the ability of this group to work together is, I think, was the biggest success in terms of getting these projects off the ground, getting them implemented. Protecting the legacy, there is the issue I see of still keeping these projects going as people change jobs, as people retire. We've had a number of retirements over the decade I've been involved with. Like I said, the trees we plant have to persist for 60 years. Hopefully they don't get cut down before that. A beautiful spot to visit. I'll throw up some acknowledgements, but I'll bring it to a close there to at least let Eli have some time. But thank you very much for inviting me in. Hopefully that made some sense.
Good afternoon. I think I have the presentation up and you can all see that in slideshow format. My name is Elizabeth Holmes. I go by Eli. We're talking about the Willamette River today, which is the basin that you would be in if you had come to Pilk this year to join us. Hopefully next time you can come and you'll have a little bit more of a background to understand the river basin and maybe use it as an opportunity to explore next time you are here. I'm going to talk about holding the line on work that's been done and then also simultaneously pushing the envelope forward. That's how we're currently thinking about successful tactics in river restoration at Willamette Riverkeeper. So the Willamette River Basin, as Lisa mentioned, it's actually 187 miles long, the main stem of the Willamette, not 107. Which makes a big difference on a windy afternoon when you're paddling. So there's a water trail that goes most of the length of the Willamette River. There's great camping spots along the way. It's a really great experience, and you can do multi-day trips or you can do afternoon trips. It's a really fun, easy resource to access for millions of Oregonians. We also have many different waters that lead into it from the Cascades and from the Coast Range, from the Middle Fork and the Coast Fork and the headwaters up at Waldo Lake, Mackenzie, the Calapooya, the Santiam Basin, the Yamhill Basin. There's a lot of different waters that come in from our our Oregon forests to bring cool, clean water into the Willamette River. And to tie it into what Lisa was mentioning, what Mary Lou was mentioning, about 12 to 15% of the waters of the Columbia actually come from the Willamette River Basin. We have a lot of different kinds of uses. We have industrial, we have municipalities, we have agriculture. We also have a number of communities that use their drinking, that pull their drinking water from the Willamette River. We also have several endangered species, protected fish that are in the Willamette River, and we have a lot of freshwater mussel species that we're just learning about, and some of them actually have a petition for listing under the ESA. So the Willamette River is historically prone to flooding. It's been traditionally had wetlands, prairies. It's mostly a shallow river, pretty silty in some spots with some soft banks. And it's come a long way since the pollution problems that it had in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. But with increasing population and an aging infrastructure system, particularly for the sewer systems of the municipalities that are up and down the river, and aging dam infrastructure system, there's some increases in problems with pollution in the river. Willamette Riverkeeper's goal is to provide excellent water quality and abundant natural habitat, and preserve the river as being safe for fishing and recreation. We believe that recreation on the river is a basic public right, and that all people that live up and down the river and the diverse populations that we have in Oregon along the river are entitled to have that protection. The three different main ways that we focus on our river restoration strategies are through a modest land acquisition program. We also do watershed enhancement, which is more along the lines of the traditional restoration, some of the activities that Neil was just mentioning. And then we also have water quality enforcement angle. I'm going to focus mostly on the last piece because that's the area that I work in primarily, but I'll tell you a little bit about the first two programs that we have. For our land acquisition program, really the need is to preserve natural landscapes and allow these to provide essential habitat along the Willamette River for the river and for riparian species. And we have a small number of properties. We're not a land trust, but we have a small number of properties that we use to restore, to help protect the habitat, and also integrate into some of our recreation opportunities that we have through Willamette Riverkeeper. And I'll tell you more about those at the end because we have a lot of trips coming up starting now, and some of them just opened today for registration. We also work through our land acquisition program with many First Nations groups in order to identify and manage properties and mutually support each other's efforts in this regard to protect the Willamette River Basin as a whole. This is a picture of the property. It's one of the properties that we have where there's been just some beautiful work done to bring the sort of back channels back to the quiet, beautiful ecosystem that we have here. On the watershed enhancement front, we work on a number of different projects to improve and maintain the natural floodplain and forest areas. This is to support diverse biological functions of the river. Often it takes place in some pretty ecologically complex areas. And we do things like plantings and pullings to add to the diverse plantings that we have. And then also we do weed pulls pretty frequently. There's always a need for volunteers on these efforts that we have. I know that, each year, particularly in the spring, when we do a lot of plantings, there's a lot of work that goes into, planting thousands of trees at once in specific areas and on projects. We also have, invasive species that are starting to come in. And so we have a lot of weed pulling activities that go on as well. And we work on these projects with many different partners, from private to public entities. This is Willamette Mission State Park, and this is just a picture of Ludwigia, which is an invasive plant that's gaining a stranglehold in certain parts of the Willamette River, and we're working aggressively to try and combat this. This is just an example of what a lot of work can do. On the enforcement piece, so the way that our enforcement work comes together is that we really look at federal, state, and local laws. It just depends on the particular issue that we have. And so I'm going to talk about, depending on time, certainly 4 of our victories, and then I'll mention a couple of other ones. We had one last night, which is very exciting. There's been an issue going on for several years in a couple different parts of the country, mostly on larger bodies of water than the Willamette River. So mostly on lakes. But there's this activity called river surfing or wake surfing, which is not having a natural wave that you would be riding on, but it's a boat, a very heavy boat that's heavily ballasted, that creates a giant wave behind the boat that allows you to surf. And this is a picture of what that activity looks like. This is not a picture on the Willamette, but it's the same concept. You have a boat that digs a deep trough, and it creates a wave behind you that is anywhere from 2, 3, or 4 feet high, even in certain instances. On the Willamette River, we don't usually have waves like that, and we certainly don't have them in the summertime, which is when this activity is very popular. And we have been working for several years now through petitions to state agencies, through letter writing campaigns to state agencies, through rulemaking procedures with state agencies, working with different organizations and different groups to push the issue. And we also sent a notice of intent to sue under the Endangered Species Act to the Oregon State Marine Board, the Department of Environmental Quality, and the Department of State Lands, asking them to regulate this because the Willamette River is critical habitat for 4 protected salmon species. And the problem is that this activity essentially stirs up turbidity in the water, and the turbidity causes all sorts of problems with sedimentation, temperature, which is protected under a TMDL in the Willamette River. And because the Willamette River is salmon habitat, but also particularly the nearshore environment serves as the nursery for salmon, this can cause a lot of problems. And here's a picture we took of the Willamette River, showing some of the nearshore turbidity that happens when wake surfing is going on. And as you can see, there's not really a lot of waves. That's sort of the typical view of the Willamette River in the summertime. But finally, last night, there was a bill that was passed in the Oregon legislature that is limiting the weight of the boats that can be used in the Willamette River in the sections that are most popular for river surfing. And this is going to be helpful because, like I mentioned, the heavier the boat, the deeper the boat can really dig into the water and cause these large waves to occur. So by limiting the boat weight, that is going to essentially restrict some of the specific boats that are used for this activity from being able to do this activity in the Willamette, and it's going to work towards protecting the river. And I'm happy to share the notice of intent to sue letter, the petition we did to the Department of State Lands. I'm happy to share any of those documents for folks that are interested. Another victory I want to mention is with Columbia Riverkeeper. We filed a lawsuit under the Clean Water Act against Zenith, which is up in Portland, and they had started to expand their fuels facility and started to do earth moving and grading around the facility, which is close to the river. They had started to do this without getting a construction permit. And so we sued under the Clean Water Act and were able to get a favorable result, requiring them to make certain mitigation changes to the project that they were working on. At the same time, the DEQ also issued an administrative order instructing Zenith to undertake certain mitigation actions for this construction activity. The second piece of this is that Zenith is also looking to continue their expansion, but they also need to get a Title V air permit, which has to go through the City of Portland Land Use Compatibility Statement process. And for those of you that have been following this, you probably know that the City of Portland denied the application, citing to the city's new climate change provisions in its comprehensive plan. That was taken to LUBA, and recently LUBA issued a decision that remanded the denial of the LUX to the city. So the City of Portland is reviewing it. Zenith has appealed that to the Oregon Court of Appeals, so that's kind of in flux, but we and Columbia Riverkeeper intervened at LUBA to ensure that the city is taking a strong position in defending their comprehensive plan, and in particular the climate provisions. And we are collectively represented by CRAG in that matter. Another issue that we have been involved in that affects water quality, certainly more in the upper reaches and the tributaries and creeks that feed into the Willamette, is logging. And particularly after the devastating fires that we had in Oregon in 2020, there's been thousands of acres that federal agencies and state agencies have proposed for logging projects. And we've been working with a number of partners to fight back on that, including Cascadia Wildlands and Oregon Wild, and also working with CRAG on some of these cases. And one in particular in the Willamette National Forest sought to use a categorical exclusion of essentially saying that logging large amounts of these post-fire trees was simply road repair and maintenance activities. But they wanted to use this across thousands of acres. And we sued under NEPA and were able to get a preliminary injunction, which is a pretty big deal. And subsequently, the project was actually withdrawn by the Forest Service. So we've been involved in these kinds of battles to try and protect water quality in the higher reaches before it comes to the Willamette River. Another case I'll mention is a FOIA case, a Freedom of Information Act case that we have. I mentioned earlier that one of the things that Willamette Riverkeeper is concerned about is the aging infrastructure of the different engineering structures that we have along the Willamette River, and that includes the 13 federal dams across the Willamette Valley. These dams are pretty old, and everything has a lifespan. And we've started to get some concerns from some of our members about the dams and repairs that are being made or are not being made. And also because there's additional litigation going on regarding the dams and their effects on the river system. You know, one of the questions we have is, gosh, well, shouldn't we also be looking at the structural integrity of these dams at the same time that we're looking at making potentially other changes to the dams? In addition, many of you know about the Cascadia subduction zone and reports that have come out recently. And so one of the questions that Willamette Riverkeeper has is how, how much has the Corps considered potential catastrophic implications of these dams if they are not up to snuff? And we are working with Dan Snyder at the law offices of Charlie Tebbett on this. We succeeded in getting an agreement from the Corps to release 7,000 pages of records a month, which is a pretty good outcome in terms of an agreement for FOIA records. And we're getting inundation maps, we're getting engineering reports and designs. And so we know there's a couple journalists in the area that are interested in helping us cover this. And so hopefully there'll be more information coming out soon. And then I will just mention some other cases and issues that we're working on. We're working on, sewer, wastewater, and stormwater permitting. You can imagine with all the municipalities up and down the Willamette River that it's almost like every day we are getting a new notice of a permit that's coming out, either an individual permit or a general permit. We have had a couple of partners that we've worked on with some of these cases, including Bricklin Newman, has been very helpful on some of these matters. We have a pretty interesting case against the Department of Homeland Security for violating NEPA by not conducting a NEPA analysis prior to discharging tear gas and other chemical munitions against protesters in Portland during the 2020 protests. And we filed a complaint and included documentation and pictures that some of the debris from the munitions is actually getting into the Willamette River from storm drains, which we have concerns about given the toxic nature of some of these chemicals. We also are working on factory farms. There's an expansion of chicken broiler operations in the beautiful Santiam River Basin and the North Santiam Basin area, spurned by Foster Farms. And so there's a number of facilities that we're working on pushing back on. And there's a local group there called Farmers Against Foster Farms. We've connected with them, and we're also working with the Center for Food Safety, keeping an eye on those and hopefully pushing back hard. We also have, going back to some of the volunteer opportunities we have cleanups on a regular basis up and down the Willamette River, and we work with a number of private and public agencies and entities to do those cleanups and push for stronger enforcement of different laws against the parties responsible for not cleaning up their own properties. We also do land use law. We have a special greenway code here in Oregon that applies to the Willamette River to protect the natural resources of the river. And there's amendments coming out that we think they're happening in Eugene right now, but we believe they're going to expand up and down the municipalities up and down the river. And that's something that we're watching very closely. And there's other municipal land use issues that come up on a pretty regular basis. So we have a lot going on at the federal level and state level and at local level. And again, the whole goal is really to hold the line for the protections that we have, and then try and push the envelope for a little bit more. And I just wanted to list some of the events that we have coming up. If you want to paddle, please come out, please sign up online. We have a lot of exciting things coming up this summer, hopefully with things opening up in our post-COVID world. And you can sign up at WillametteRiverkeeper.org. And thanks for coming today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much to all three of our panelists for those really interesting and informative presentations. We're gonna move to the Q&A portion of the panel now. So I'm gonna look at this first question. I believe that it's meant for Neil. It says, can you say a bit more about the cross-border collaborations and challenges re the parts of the basin in Canada? So that might be for Mary Lou, actually, for the parts of the Columbia River Basin.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. And I actually made a mistake also, Lisa, on when I was going to try to answer one. It was a question for Neil about the Canadian dollars. So I apologize. So that needs to be answered. Obviously we're focused on the Columbia River Basin within the United States because we work with the Clean Water Act, and that focuses on the US. But we are absolutely in collaboration with the First Nations. And I think one of the, and our Canadian partners. And I think one of the ways that we've been in collaboration is through some of the fish restoration work efforts that are going on between the United States and Canada, and the First Nations have been working with the Columbia River tribal governments in the United States on those fish restoration efforts. We're exploring, we're really interested, you know, as these fish restoration efforts move forward, how our work in the United States can help the work with Canada. And I think we see, you know, way more opportunities in the futures. So yes, we are connected, we are talking to folks, and we're looking for more opportunities to connect and engage. And I hope that answered the question.
Thank you. And the next question is actually for Neil. It says, on the restoration timeline slides on your presentation, are those Canadian or US dollars?
Yeah, Canadian dollars. I suppose I could have converted it. So when we started, the dollar was probably stronger, and it's more meaningful.
And then we have a question from Reza that says, there is an overwhelming consensus among experts that the deauthorization of UWR dams is the best recovery means for the Chinook salmon and winter steelheads in the basin. And assuming that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers decides to deauthorize these dams, what would be some of the foreseeable challenges at the initial stage of that process in terms of water quality and habitat conservation that must be addressed in the basin?
I think I know how to generally answer that question, but I think there's going to be a better answer that's going to come from Neil or from Mary Lou that would be more familiar with the sort of ecosystem functions in a post-dam world. Would you mind if I kick that question over to one of you two?
Sure.
I'm just the lawyer.
Dam removal is incredibly challenging and expensive. I've seen a few of these. I've had a little experience with removal of dams. I've more seen failures of dams, Mount Poly being one that you may have heard of down there. But yeah, it's not simple. What you've disturbed is how do you put it? It's very difficult to put it back. You know, you've basically usually infilled the area behind the dam with a lot of silt and sand, fine sediments deposited on the bottom. When you drain the dam, all that collapses into the river channel, causes downstream problems. So, you know, there's a number of different ways to deal with that. I mean, I'm thinking about the engineering side. I'm not sure if when you think about foreseeable challenges, I think there's lots of administrative challenges. There's cost challenges. There's who do you hold responsible? Who pays for it all, who does the work, and then to what degree do you restore, you know? And when you look at restoring function, most dams are built on river systems. So the original function is a river channel with functional banks and so on. Like I was showing in my presentation, it's very difficult in my experience to recreate those in an engineering world. You can't just build the river channel and plant vegetation. Most of our landscape in Canada was glaciated, so it's taken 10,000 years or something like that to establish these sort of balances. So it's a massive engineering challenge, but doing so, I mean, the US is much more progressive than Canada in a lot of its, say, floodplain reclamation, in its removal of dams, reestablishment, you know, to reconnect the fish habitat, to provide that fish passage, access to fish up in those areas, and to return more of the natural habitat. The benefits are huge if you can get there. Mary Lou, I don't know if you have anything to add.
I can add a little bit. I have been working on dams. I started working on dams actually way before I started working on toxics. And I think the answer to that kind of lies in what we've seen happen. So there was the Penobscot Dam in Maine that came down probably about almost like 15 years ago. We saw the Elwha Dam come down on the Olympic Peninsula. The White Salmon Dam on the Columbia River came down about 10 years ago. Folks may know that there is the Klamath dams in Southern Oregon and Northern California. There was just an agreement signed to move forward on taking those dams down. And there are conversations going on right now about possible removal of the Lower Snake dams. So I think if you look at some of the dam removals that have happened, we've seen river systems recover. We've seen natural processes recover. And I think they saw that in Maine. They've seen that in the Elwha. In the White Salmon River, we're actually doing, there's some work right now trying to address some of the sedimentation that's blocked some of the tribal fishing areas that are at the mouth of the White Salmon River. So yeah, I mean, you're taking a highly altered, just like what Neil said, you're taking a highly altered ecosystem and you're trying to revert it to a natural ecosystem. And some things are going to get fixed and some things are probably going to need a little bit of help to do that. So I think, I mean, my best recommendation on that is that if folks are really interested in this in the Willamette, take a look at some of the other things that are happening around the country. I think I read recently, American River said 57 dam removals have occurred over the past year. That's a lot. So take a look at some of those dam removals, take a look at some of the things that are happening, and then, you know, try and start putting the science together to help, you know, if that's going to happen in the Willamette, try and put the science together to help folks come up with a pathway that has a couple of different off ramps that you might need to address as, you know, as the restoration of the river moves forward in an undammed system. So that's my 2 cents. And I think it complements what Neil said, and good luck, man. Good luck on that.
Yes.
So next we have a question for Neil, and it says, how could the timber companies in the San Juan drainage improve practices to minimize impact on river morphology?
Ooh,
Ryan.
yes, a good question. Yeah, I mean, there's a number of things. I would say they've done a lot, you know, in the restoration that we did, they supplied all the seedlings for the plantings. So, and they provided the expertise in terms of their foresters. There's a lot of research that the timber companies have done in terms of suitable species, successional planting, that kind of thing. There's a wealth. I mean, they all did it for economic reasons to see what they should plant where and how to make the most money, but that fed into the program that we were doing in terms of where to plant, what to plant, and how to plant it, and what to do to the sites to maximize the productivity. I mean, there's probably some good answers. I kind of think the ship has sailed on the riparian aspect of the river. Like, we're now into an era, in my opinion, like I've seen hard armoring on much smaller systems. And I'm talking about riprap. You know, you drop a rock in, you protect a bank, you try and build the river and physically build it. And for those of you who watched the atmospheric river that rolled through in November last year, I mean, it took out every bridge on our major routes to the interior. You know, you couldn't build something. Arguably, some were possibly under-engineered, but I mean, you know, they eventually nature will just wipe it out. Nature is somewhat relentless in its pursuit of destroying things that we engineer. So I think the best we can do, it will take time. There are some other strategies. There's a group out of Washington that does these engineered log jams. We looked into it, but we didn't want to play around with something we didn't really fully understand or have expertise in. And that would be, you know, you harvest wood from the basin and you build log jams that are anchored into the sediment. But in our work in the basin, we saw log jams that we thought would persist, huge big logs all wrapped up in each other, all tangled up. And I put cameras, time-lapse trail cameras on them to watch them. And in the highest floods, they all lift up in the flood and eventually float away. And I've never seen anything, no matter how big, no matter how solid it looks, last out there. So I think what they can do is step back from the riparian area. If they cease harvesting, which they more or less have done, try and leave the corridor alone. We've tried to cut off access to the river to prevent people from getting down there. People do tend to cut trees themselves on the riverbanks just for firewood while they're camping, things like that. So lots of little things. I think we just have to give the river time at this point to begin to reestablish somewhat naturally, but it's going to take, yeah, it's hard on when you think about our lifespan of only being 60 to 100 years, if we're going to have to wait 100 to 200 years. I think our estimates from our research project is that the sediment the sediment that's been generated over the last 100 years is going to take at least 200 years to work its way out to the estuary. And that's an optimistic estimate, out to maybe 500 years. So given the uncertainty and the power of the river at this point and the damage that's been done, could take 500 to 1,000 years for things to begin to stabilize. It's not very encouraging, but every little bit helps, I think. But hopefully that's part of an answer for you.
So seeing actually as we are both out of time and out of questions, I think it's time to wrap up. But thank you to all of our panelists and everyone who attended and asked all these really insightful questions. And I hope to see everyone at more panels the rest of the weekend.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Bye, thanks. Take care, everybody.